Imagine it's September 1914. A shipyard in Dunkirk smells of hot iron and sea salt, hammers ringing over diesel and steam. Commander Charles Samson of the Royal Naval Air Service watches his men bolt 6mm boilerplate onto the body of a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. The steel has been scavenged from the local works, Ateliers et Chantiers de France, and the chassis beneath was built for country lanes and country houses, not for bullets and shell splinters. Samson intends to drive it straight at German cavalry patrols. It looks absurd, a luxury motor car wrapped in gray steel with a machine gun poking from a roof hatch, crewed by sailors who have never fought on land. Within weeks, though, a flotilla of these improvised machines is harrying German scouting parties between Dunkirk and Antwerp. Within months, the Admiralty orders a standardized armored body with a fully rotating turret. Before the year is out, those standardized Rolls-Royces will be rolling at the front, and within a few years, modified descendants will be fighting across Egypt, Arabia, and German East Africa. The little car that began as an act of improvisation would become one of the longest-serving armored fighting vehicles of the 20th century. You have to understand the moment to make sense of the machine. In the opening weeks of the war, the Western Front is still shockingly mobile. Cavalry screens probe, cut lines of communication, and vanish. Aircraft are scarce, and pilots must be rescued when they come down behind enemy lines. Samson, short of aeroplanes but overflowing with initiative, realizes that armed motor cars can do what cavalry once did, only faster, further, and with heavier sustained firepower. On 4 September, an early ad hoc attack by Felix Samson, Charles's brother, mounting a Maxim on an unarmored touring car, proves the concept, but it also proves its flaw. An unarmored car is a single-use weapon. One rifle bullet at close range, and the vehicle and its crew are finished. Armor is the answer, even if the first armor is crude. The 6mm boilerplate fitted in Dunkirk will stop a bullet at a distance. It is not proof against concentrated fire at short range. Yet, it is better than nothing. At the start, the War Office is unconvinced. Senior Army commanders shrug. Armored motor cars look like novelties. The Admiralty's skeptics are no more enthusiastic. It takes a minister with imagination, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, to see the potential. He requisitions every serviceable Silver Ghost chassis he can find and sanctions the Royal Naval Armoured Car Division. What Churchill understands, and what many in the War Office miss, is that the internal combustion engine is not a curiosity for parades. It can remake ground warfare just as certainly as it remade the high seas and the air. A vehicle that can do 40 miles per hour, carry a machine gun, and give its crew some protection from small arms fire can control roads, screen advances, and exploit retreats in a way horsemen cannot. The choice of the Silver Ghost is deliberate. Rolls-Royce had already earned a reputation for over-engineering. The firm's cars finished the 1913 Alpine trial without a single mechanical failure. The Ghost's 6-cylinder engine, the famous 40/50 HP unit, offered torque and endurance rather than sporty sprinting. Naval designers concentrated armor where it mattered most: thick plates at the front, reinforced turrets, and lighter plating on the flanks. William Beardmore & Co. of Glasgow produced rolled steel plates riveted to a light internal frame. The turret rode on a ball race, so the Vickers gunner could spin a full 360 degrees, even on broken ground. The final product weighed in at roughly 4 3/4 tons combat loaded, had a practical range measured in the low hundreds of miles, and could reach speeds on good roads that laughed at a cavalry mount. The first 3 standardized turreted cars were delivered on 3 December 1914. Then the world changed. By late 1914, the Western Front freezes into trenches, barbed wire, and artillery, a landscape where cars do not survive. the Rolls-Royce is redeployed to theaters that suit wheels, the wide spaces and hard tracks of the desert, and the long policing patrols of empire. It finds its environment in Egypt and the Sinai, and it will build a reputation there that outlasts its improvised birth. The desert is, in its way, the ideal proving ground for a vehicle born of meticulous civilian engineering. In 1916, Major Hugh Grosvenor, the second Duke of Westminster, commands a light armored car brigade built around Rolls-Royce chassis. On 26 February, a squadron fights at Agadir, and weeks later, the vehicles undertake a rescue that reads like something out of a pulp serial. 92 British sailors, shipwrecked and captured deep in the Libyan wastes, are reported held by Senussi tribesmen. Westminster assembles a column, 9 armored Rolls-Royces, 26 supply tenders, and 10 ambulances. They drive 120 miles into hostile country. The Senussi flee at the sight of the cars, and every prisoner is recovered without casualty, a 250-mile round trip in 22 hours. The tale is part legend, part consequence. Speed, reliability, and shock on wheels can accomplish what infantry columns sometimes cannot. The Rolls-Royce turns up in surprising places. In German East Africa, armored car squadrons harass von Lettow-Vorbeck's column. In the Caucasus and Galicia, Commander Oliver Locker-Lampson's armored car force racks up astonishing mileage. At Gallipoli and in Palestine, these machines bring mobile, concentrated firepower to amphibious landings and raids. And then there is T.E. Lawrence, the man who turned desert raiding into theater, who prized his roles so highly he called one of his tenders Blue Mist, and famously jury-rigged a snapped leaf spring with a board and a pistol. When Lawrence wrote that a Rolls in the desert was more valuable than rubies, he was echoing a truth these working cars kept proving. Between the wars, the design does not die, it evolves. Wheels and radiator protection change, turrets are reshaped, cupolas and revised rooms for wireless sets are added. Britain's imperial policing strategy, fast, cheap RAF armored car companies covering vast territories, keeps the Rolls-Royce relevant. At the 1921 Cairo Conference, political economy and hard logistics together made a practical argument. A fast armored car beats keeping a permanent garrison in many far-flung posts. So the cars that began life bolted together in Dunkirk continue to patrol Arabia, Palestine, and Africa. When the Second World War arrives, the Rolls-Royce is mechanically a relic, but it is not useless. Modified versions quietly perform where mobility and reliability trump armor thickness. In the Western Desert, 11th Hussars patrols using old Rolls cars score captures and interceptions in the campaign's opening moves. Far from being obsolete, the cars, when sensibly used, still do exactly what reconnaissance is supposed to do: find the enemy, report his position, and survive to bring the story home. Purpose-built successors arrive, Marmon Harringtons, Humbers, and Daimlers with heavier guns and better cross-country traction. But the Rolls refuses to vanish entirely. Where the terrain is open and the need is endurance, it remains hard to beat.
That longevity raises the larger question: why did a motor car first fitted with scrap plate in a Dunkirk yard endure across 3 decades of mechanized warfare? The answer is not romance, it is engineering logic. Rolls-Royce built a chassis to standards of refinement and reliability far beyond the price-boxed military market alternatives. Those generous tolerances absorbed desert sand and heat rather than seizing and failing. The vehicle's reliability saved more patrols than armor could ever saved. Reliability, speed, and the right tactical employment kept it useful long after its designers had left the drawing board. There are limits. Against later interwar and Second World War armored cars mounting autocannons and against vehicles with all-wheel drive and heavier protection, the Rolls could be outclassed. its two-wheel rear-road drive and light armor meant vulnerability to mines and heavy guns. But the vehicle's record is not measured by how it performed in headline tank battles. It is measured by how often it returned from long patrols and by how many theaters of war it served in. That is how a car conceived in improvisation quietly shaped decades of British mobile warfare. Think back to the shipyard in Dunkirk. A naval officer, frustrated and resourceful, bolts scrap to a luxury chassis because the military establishment doubted the future of armored cars. The improvisation becomes a pattern. The pattern becomes doctrine for desert policing and mobile operations, and the vehicle becomes a legend that fights on through 2 world wars and across continents. T.E. Lawrence's praise, "Great was Rolls and great was Royce," is not mere flattery. It is a tactical verdict. Sometimes the finest civilian engineering applied to war with imagination proves the most durable tool. If you're enjoying this look at the machines that quietly shaped modern war, hit subscribe. We unpack gear and doctrine like this every week. The Rolls-Royce Armoured Car did not win trench battles. It did something subtler, and in many places far more decisive. It let small, mobile forces operate far from supply lines. It harassed and reconnoitered where horses could not. It saved lives by being there and being dependable. Its recipe: start with excellence, adapt ruthlessly, and use the vehicle where it fits, left a footprint across a century of conflict. That is why a luxury chassis wrapped in crude plate became one of the longest-serving armored fighting vehicles of the 20th century. If you liked this episode, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with the theater you'd like us to cover next, and check the description for source notes and reading recommendations. We'll see you next time.